Welcome to Pixie and the Paranormal. I'm Pix, and in this episode, I'm talking all about America's first documented ghost story, the case of Nelly Butler. This story originates in the late 1700s and includes tons of documentation, including witness testimonies, and it remains a mystery to this day. Parts of this story will seem ridiculous, while other parts will seem eerie. So stay with me for the whole story and then a discussion at the end, and don't forget to share, like, comment, and subscribe for more paranormal content. Hey ghosties, thanks for being here with me again. I have another episode that I just couldn't wait to get out to you. Now, this is a topic that I've discussed previously on my channel, but I wanted to revisit it and tell it in more of a story format. Please know, though, there is probably so much more to the story, and I'm honestly just sharing the key details. As I mentioned in the intro, we are talking all about the case of Nelly Butler, America's first documented ghost. I'm going into as much detail as I could find, and surprisingly, there is a lot of information on this story. It was widely documented. And November is the month of the dead, so I figured this is the perfect time to share the story with you. I'm actually thinking of doing more episodes regarding November and the dead. If you have any suggestions, please send them to me. Before we go any further, though, I do want to warn you that this story involves death, including infant death, baby loss, as well as adult and child relationships. So if these are topics that are triggering to you, please do not listen any further. The case of Nelly Butler started on August 9th, 1799 in Sullivan, Maine. So as you're listening, just try to visualize or imagine what life would be like in 1799 in Maine. Anyway, Abner Blaisdell heard knocking noises in his home, as well as what sounded like a faint conversation, the kind where you can't make out any of the words, but you know you hear voices having a discussion. Now, it's important to note that Abner was a God-fearing man who had served as a sergeant in the American Revolution. To me, that means that not only did he believe in supernatural spirits to some extent due to his religion, but he was also highly regarded in his community, and therefore, what he shared with other people would have been respected as truth. It wouldn't have been brushed off or taken lightly. So after Abner reported hearing those knocking sounds and that sort of faint conversation, nothing else was documented until a few months later on January 2nd, 1800, just after the new year and right in the middle of the cold and dark winter. Abner and his teenage daughter Lydia heard a woman's voice coming from their cellar. I don't know much of what their cellar looked like, but can you just imagine a cellar from 1800? It had to be damp, dark, a little spooky. Anyway, the voice said, quote, "I'm the dead wife of Captain George Butler, born Nelly Hooper," end quote. Now, Abner actually knew Nelly's father, David Hooper. Nelly was a 21-year-old wife who had sadly passed away 3 years prior during a tragic childbirth. Nelly's baby also passed shortly after Nelly did. That, to me, is just heartbreaking. The devastation and loss. At the end of this episode, I'm going to circle back around to some thoughts I have about that, actually. So, after hearing this spirit say she was Nelly Butler, Abner sent for Nelly's father, David. According to what I could find online, David was skeptical at first about this spirit, especially it being his late daughter. However, ultimately, he was curious when he heard this news, and according to a newspaper article, he decided to walk 5 miles through a raging snowstorm to arrive at Abner's residence. And honestly, that is another heartbreaking detail to me. What father wouldn't want to investigate this claim and see if it really was his daughter? I mean, I can only imagine that a big part of him hoped it was, so he would be able to commune with her. So eventually, David Hooper arrived at Abner's residence and joined Abner in his cellar, and once again, Nelly spoke, making her father now a true believer. David Hooper eventually even wrote, quote, "She gave such clear and irresistible tokens of her being the spirit of my own daughter as gave me no less satisfaction than admiration and delight," end quote. After her father left that night, Nelly then appeared visually like an apparition to Abner's son Paul. Apparently, this terrified Paul, and he ran all the way to his own home, and he reported that the apparition floated behind him the whole time, chasing him as he ran through the fields. Paul also reported that Nelly's apparition had scolded him during all of this for not stopping and speaking with her, which is kind of funny, right? Our girl Nelly did not appreciate Paul's bad manners, apparently. So as Nelly's spirit began communicating with Abner's family more and more over time, it became apparent that she most frequently communicated with Abner's 15-year-old daughter Lydia. In fact, it seemed as though she was trying to encourage a relationship with 15-year-old Lydia and her own husband, Captain George Butler, who was 29 at that time, which, like, ew, right? Weird. Not only would I not be telling people they had to marry my husband, it would especially not be a teenage girl, right? But Lydia would often knock on the walls in the cellar, and Nelly's specter would answer. This started to cause some people to speculate if Lydia was some kind of witch or possibly possessed. By the end of February 1800, so just 1 month later, Nelly was becoming practically famous around their town and the surrounding towns. The story of the apparition that talked to people really had a hold on everyone. I mean, even today this would be incredible and unbelievable, so I can only imagine how it enthralled everyone in 1800. People were actually crowding into Abner's home in attempts to see and hear Nelly, and many reported that they did. There are so many witness testimonies that were documented from this case. One female witness described Nelly saying, quote, "At first the apparition was a mere mass of light. Then it grew into a personal form about as tall as myself, and the glow from the apparition had a constant tremulous motion. At last, the personal form became shapeless, expanded every way, and then vanished in a moment." End quote. I find these types of witness testimonies both fascinating and hard to believe. I mean, when Nelly's father heard her, it wasn't surprising to me because I really think that sometimes we just want to believe so badly that our opinions can be swayed, right? But the fact that even now strangers were documenting experiences with this ghost, for lack of a better term, makes me wonder, like, what were they experiencing? Just like her father, Nelly's own sister, Sally Wentworth, eventually visited Abner's home and documented the following, quote, "While I held Lydia by the arm, we heard the sound of knocking. Lydia spoke and a voice answered, the sound of which brought fresh to my mind that of my sister's voice in an instant. But I could not understand it at all, though it was within the compass of my embrace, and had it been a creature which breathed, it would have breathed in my face, and I had no impediment of hearing. But Lydia told me that it said, 'We must live in peace and be united.' Then we came up, but Lydia and others went down again. I passed through the room which led to the cellar into another room, and there I was much surprised when I plainly understood by the same kind of voice, still speaking in the cellar, these words, 'I am the voice of the one crying in the wilderness,' and other sentences which I cannot remember. This is testified by several others who were with me. From this time I cleared Lydia as to the voice and accused the devil." End quote. Again, this is sort of heartbreaking to me. I know that if my sister had passed, I would want to hear her voice and feel her presence everywhere. It would be so hard for me to deny it was her because I would want that connection, you know? So the sister documented that she did experience something, but seemingly did not believe it to be her sister, but rather a demonic energy. Again, like, how sad, but like also kind of intriguing. There are several documented witness testimony of seeing and hearing Nelly's specter even without Lydia in the room with them. By May of that year, again 1800, Nelly's ghost was finally able to convince everyone that her husband George Butler should marry Abner's 15-year-old daughter Lydia, even though Lydia was seemingly reluctant. Tangent, I just have to say that obviously today this would be highly inappropriate. I feel icky even saying it because it's just so foreign to me. I don't know about that time period, but I'm guessing it was acceptable. However, I feel for Lydia because according to the sources I found, she didn't seem totally on board with the marriage. There are just so many odd turns this story takes, and sometimes they're weird and too fantastical, and sometimes they're just heartbreaking. But let me get back to the story. Nelly's ghost convinced everyone that her husband should marry Lydia, and they did marry on May 28th, 1800. Now, what's weird is the day after the wedding, literally the next day after George Butler married his child bride Lydia, Lydia's father Abner reported receiving ominous news from Nelly's ghost, and here is where things take yet another turn. Nelly said to Abner, quote, "Be kind to your wife, for she will not be with you long. She will have but one child and then die," end quote. Of course, this caused many of the townspeople to believe this to now be a curse and that the entity was never really Nelly Butler like everyone had thought, but rather a demonic entity. I mean, this is a really big twist because apparently everyone had just agreed that yes, George Butler should marry Lydia. Others then believed the haunting was actually just a hoax, and they accused Abner of deceiving George Butler into marrying his daughter Lydia. This apparently caused the ghost to manifest in front of even more people and with a religious intensity now. So throughout this case, more than 100 people had seen or heard the ghost of Nelly Butler, and many even gave sworn testimony to the local pastor, Reverend Cummings. That is honestly a lot of testimony. I'm sure some of it was just the thrill of being involved or scared, and some of it was true believers. But anyway, Reverend Cummings, however, did not believe in ghosts and did not think his parish should either. The Reverend decided to visit Abner's home one night, and while walking through Abner's fields, he suddenly saw a woman reporting that she was, quote, "surrounded by a bright light. At first her form was no bigger than that of a toad," end quote. Apparently, Nelly's apparition grew from a small size to normal size before the Reverend's eyes. I know that's like a rhyme. And he also became convinced of the ghost story everyone was talking about. The final time the ghost manifested was August 1800, 1 year after the experiences began. One night in August 1800, 48 people followed the ghost from Abner's house to a skeptical neighbor's house because the apparition wanted to show the skeptic that it wasn't confined to Abner's basement. Once it proved itself to the skeptical neighbor, it vanished for the final time and was never seen again. This story doesn't end here, though. Here's the wildest part to me. Only 10 months later, the prophecy that Nelly's apparition shared regarding Lydia's fate sadly proved true. Lydia died shortly after childbirth in 1801, and unfortunately, her baby didn't survive either. She suffered the same fate as Nelly Butler and the exact fate the apparition warned them of. George Butler, however, eventually married again and fathered 4 children. Even though personally this story sounds far-fetched to me, there is a lot of documentation for this haunting, including transcribed testimony from witnesses. Newspaper articles and books have been written about it, which, tangent, Santa, if you are listening, I would love the book written about this case. I've only read a few online resources, but I'm sure the book has a lot more in-depth information. The case of Nelly Butler was and still is quite a phenomenon and mystery. I can only imagine being alive during the time and witnessing this all unfold. I'm sure it would have had a total grip on me. It really does play out like a scary movie or horror story, doesn't it? I would have definitely been one of those 100 people to visit Abner's house, that is for sure. I like to think of myself as a skeptical believer. I believe in the paranormal, and honestly, I believe most things could be possible, but that's a whole other discussion for another day. But I also don't just blindly believe all claims. I need to try to see if something can be explained rationally first, and if it can't, then I start to try to explain it with the paranormal. And with this case, I truly don't know what to think. On one hand, the whole story just seems to be impossible in many ways. I ultimately think there was probably something supernatural occurring, but once it became a spectacle with all those people coming and going, it was probably hard to discern truth from gossip, sort of like the same effect Whispered Down the Lane would have, like each person molds the story and over time it becomes something it just quite wasn't. I do want to also finally circle back around to infant loss and baby loss. I want to discuss the possibility that Nelly Butler's devastating delivery that resulted in her and her infant's death could potentially play a big role in this case. Just hear me out. This is a topic that is very sensitive to a lot of people, including myself. I have heard a few cases where women have experienced traumatic deliveries and afterwards they now experience more psychic abilities or a more psychic awareness and the ability to more clearly work with the other side. And on a very personal note, I experienced baby loss just 2 months ago. It was very traumatic and sad. And ever since, I've been having vivid experiences with the other side. I have frequent visitors in my dreams. I sense things before they happen. It's like it triggered something in me I had all along, but wasn't really in tune with. You can actually hear more about some of my experiences in my Thinning of the Veil video, which I can link it in this video description. Could this have possibly happened with the Nelly Butler case? And with that, ghosties, we have the mysterious case of Nelly Butler. America's first documented ghost raises more questions than answers. This story has lived on for 2 centuries and remains a paranormal mystery to this day. Was it a hoax? Was Abner trying to get his daughter married? Was it a poltergeist conjured by Lydia? Was it George Butler scamming his town for a child bride? Was it the devil? Was it really just Nelly Butler trying to help her widower? What are your thoughts?